Sam, super pumped to have you on Content and Conversation. We're an SEO firm, but from afar, listening to My First Million, following your stuff on Twitter and X, it's very clear you're a great copywriter. And I don't know, you maybe don't talk about that quite as much, but I was excited to have you come on and talk your chops there. So thanks.
I'm not a great copywriter. I'm a pretty good copywriter. I think I'm decent, and I know how to identify greatness. But I can speak the language. I can identify the winners. I know what will work. But myself, I'm an okay practitioner.
I think you're underselling yourself, but you actually made me think of sort of something that it's probably just a good marketing technique. I find I'm like pattern matching success in the SEO world. I'm like looking at what works. And that seems like you've done that same thing with copy. I don't know if it applies to every single industry, but probably to some degree.
Well, I think that what I did, I lived in San Francisco starting in 2012, and I was around like the Airbnb and Uber and like all these like big companies that took off. And I was always interested in, like, my friend Noah Kagan and Neville Medora, who are now my best friends. Before, I was just a fan of their work, and they would talk about internet marketing stuff. And like, I always like understood like both this internet marketing world, which is sometimes scammy, sometimes totally not scammy, but sometimes it is. And then I understood like the Silicon Valley, like focus on the product, don't do too much marketing world. And what I did well was I combined the two. And there's a handful of us, like my friend Ankur, who started Teachable. He was like that as well. And there's a handful of us who kind of understood both worlds, and that's kind of what I did well, I think. Basically, like taking like long form, quote, scammy stuff, but applying it to like the Silicon Valley mindset of like being great at product. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes. Makes sense. Yeah, you did that very well. Sold The Hustle, and now on to Hampton and doing a great job there. And something I noted and was looking up about The Hustle. I mean, obviously, I follow you on X and see your stuff on LinkedIn as well, and listen to My First Million. Your copywriting comes through and has a very unique flair that's you within that. But yet at the same time, I mean, I run a big content company. You clearly scaled The Hustle to something that sold in multiple millions to HubSpot. How did you scale that idea? Are there any like specific techniques you use to kind of implore that across the team?
Yeah, like, so basically my company was called The Hustle. We helped kind of pioneer, we didn't invent, but we kind of pioneered this newsletter model. Back when we started, people laughed at us. I remember an executive at some huge media company, so a founder of a huge digital media company that everyone knows, was like, dude, this is stupid. Like, this will never work. And our premise was like, if we can get 5 or 10 million people to subscribe to our newsletters, we can make like $100 million a year via advertising. And the way that you get people to subscribe is, the cool thing about email is like, it's a one-to-one conversation. So I just pretend that I'm writing only to Ross, but turns out 1 million other people are also going to read it. And that's how you build like this really cool voice where you're talking directly to your friend. And I originally started the company by writing the daily newsletter. And then I also blogged a ton in order to get people to come to the website and give us their email. And so the fear early on was like, we are not going to be able to scale beyond Sam. And when I say we, it was basically just like me. Like I can't, like, am I ever going to get out of this? Like, or do I got to write this thing every day? And so what we did was, one, we hired great people, and a lot of times the people, we hired like 2 groups of people. One was like journalists and one was not journalists, and the not journalists did better. And what we did was copy work, where we would make them write, like me or my team would write the daily email. And then afterwards, for the first like 4 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that, the new hire would just have to copy word for word what we had sent the day before.
Makes sense. And that process essentially allowed, I'm sure, great person plus process of applying copy work is what you felt kind of helped the thing scale.
Yeah, and because the premise of the company, so The Hustle was a daily newsletter, and it was sort of like a Wall Street Journal style content, but for like a 29-year-old, and mostly focused on entrepreneurship, tech, small business, that type of thing. But it was fun. It was like funny. Like, we would make jokes but they weren't. But you were still professional. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the whole theory was like you can be silly and smart at the same time. And yeah, what?
No, no, it makes sense. I mean, kind of a dovetail off of that. I saw you bring that up in something else, but you mentioned hiring great people. That is a good sentence. I'm curious if there's any more detail in like exactly how you did that
Yeah, so like
testing and
I hired lots of people who were blogging for fun, or who were like, back then when I started the hustle, I started working on it. Originally, it was a conference. And the way that I made the conference work was I would blog about the speakers, and the blogs would go viral, and then people would hear about the conference and buy a ticket. And then after doing that for 2 years, I was like, conferences suck. I have this email list of people, and I got them to come to my conference via content. Let's just make content the only part of the business. And that happened in 2016. And in 2016, Twitter was just getting popular, but it wasn't really that popular. Substack had just launched right around then. And I would find people who were like product managers or some job title at a tech company, but they clearly loved to blog because they did it in their free time. And I would be like, hey, come do this like for a full-time job. And that's how it worked. Or I would find these young kids who they did aspire to be a Wall Street Journal reporter or something like that. And a lot of our guys went and did amazing stuff like that. But I was like, hey, this could be like a 3-year pit stop. And the reason it's going to be awesome for you is because let's say I had 500,000 subscribers. I would be like, you're going to talk to 500,000 people every single day. And your name will be on it. And you can like I'm a stepping stone. So like you use me, I use you. Like this is a great trade. And so that's what we did. And I would hire these people, and I would always pay attention to A, are they blogging and creating content in their free time? And B, I did this thing called the bottom fourth of the resume. So I would look at the bottom of the resume, like where they studied, what they studied in school, what their clubs and hobbies were. And then I would just be like, oh, you studied philosophy? Like, what was your favorite class and why? And if they could like entertain me, then I loved it. If they spent like 4 years studying something and they couldn't like tell me an interesting story, I was like, you're a loser, and I don't want to be around losers. Like you're an uninteresting human being. Like I can't believe you just dedicated all this time and money to doing something and you aren't passionate about it. That's not cool. And so I would seek out these people that were like eccentric or just wildly passionate about the most unique, odd things.
Is there? I hear that, and I go to the instinct of many great writers tend to be this kind of insulated introvert. Really, the stereotype is they're insulated, introverted people that on an interview might not come through necessarily. But I don't know if that's also a copywriting attribute that you found that they maybe are a little more extroverted on average.
Our best writers, our best journalists or writers were weird people who I enjoyed, but most everyone else would not enjoy being around.
Yeah. Okay.
Like they were a combination of, some of them were super hyper. So we had this one guy named Trung who now has like something like 1 million followers on Twitter. He was a nobody when we found him. And he was like, he would yell all the time. Like when you talk to him on the phone, I'd be like, dude, Trung, please quit yelling. Because he would get excited. He was like so excitable. He would get so excited and he would go a mile a minute. Or we had this other guy named Zach, and Zach's probably the most viral guy on the internet, in my opinion, like with articles. And he was always in a bad mood, and he looked like he hated you, and like he was really quiet, and he wouldn't ever tell you his opinion. Like you would have these personality types where the more brilliant and effective they are at their job, typically the more challenging, or it wasn't for me, but it was, a lot of outsiders would be like, this person's a pain in the ass.
I can see that. That makes sense. So you kind of had the lens of being able to kind of see through those two differences, and passion could be
but I liked it, by the way. We had a joke at our company. It was, the hustle's where you can let your freak flag fly. Like I loved hiring weirdos. I liked eccentric people, and we are very clear about the canvas that they have to create on, and we are very clear about the rules, but they could go crazy within those rules.
Didn't I swear I've heard Noah say something similar, that you said you're best friends with Noah. Wasn't that one of his kind of okay dork philosophies?
It could have been. Noah and I are also, he's one of my best friends, and we're very similar, where, you know, he's a weirdo. I think I'm kind of an oddball, and we love just being around eccentric people. And so it's if you look at a lot of the people who worked for me and what they're doing now, and the same with Noah, my world-class talent is buying people's stock before it appreciates. I'm great at
Right.
that, and it's by finding people that are wacky.
So on that, one of the things I was thinking as you were talking about that process, it sounds mostly outbound. Like, were you posting on Craigslist the job description, or is this like,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
but
okay, yeah,
it's like we had some, like we would, the cool thing about our readership was like a lot of our people who worked at my company were readers, they were fans, so that made it easy. So that was like an unfair advantage, but yeah, so a bunch of them were outbound, and then, but then a lot of times, like if you know this woman named Steph Smith.
I've heard you. I think I've listened to a podcast episode with her.
Yeah, so Steph's like an
Yeah.
investor at Andreessen Horowitz. She's like this amazing woman who she's still probably less than 30, so she's gonna do amazing stuff in her life, and she's already doing amazing stuff. But she had a blog post called "To Be Great, Just Be Good Consistently," and I was like, that's such a brilliant headline and brilliant article. And I just DM'd her and I said, You're fantastic, but you're doing this part-time. Do you want to talk about doing this full-time? And I would do that with people all the time. I would find people who are bloggers and I would just be fans.
What was the company size of the Hustle at the end in people?
We were going to do roughly 20 million in revenue, and I think we had a combination of freelancers and full-time people, because we had some people who who were overseas or whatever, or in Canada. And so we had roughly 40 people who were full-time people.
Makes sense. When I hear you describe that, I think of, I'm not sure how much you listen to Bill Simmons in The Ringer, but it feels like a very similar process where, to my understanding, he's kind of like this draft junkie where he's listening to these micro podcasts, listening in on them, and like crafting and finding that perfect person. That you seem very similar to that in that way. And obviously both have worked out for you.
Yeah.
It seems like.
Yeah. Like if you look at of the 40 people, I bet you 15 of them have gone on to start companies that have made them millionaires. And like there's still guys that I keep in touch with that are now doing other stuff. And I'm like, hey, whatever you're doing next, I'm involved somehow. So it's kind of like having like little like bets floating around. And I'll be like,
Nice.
look, like, don't you like this guy, Jacob Cohen is one of my guys who worked at my company. We hired him when he was 21 and he's now only 26. And I'll be like, dude, whatever you do next, you don't have to do it with me. You don't have to take my money, but please promise me that I get to, you ask me if you accept money or whatever. And so I have like 20 people like that.
Nice. That's quite the network you got going. So you talked about headlines a second ago. I mean, something that stood out to me about My First Million, and for sure at the Hustle as well, is just your skill with that. There's many different places you're great at copy, but I read the headlines and doesn't even feel like there's a formula there. There probably is from different variations of it.
There's less than you think, but I can explain a little bit.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear you, if you're comfortable, just talk through some recent ones. I'm not sure if you even kind of came up with them, but you probably have a sense. If that sounds good, I could kind of say it out loud and then hear you describe it, or describe it.
And what you could do is if you type in thehustle.co Sam Parr, you could probably find articles that I was an author on, and those titles I wrote the headlines for all of those, because I don't always write the headlines, or I don't write the headlines for a lot of stuff anymore, but I teach people how to write them.
Nice. Okay. Makes sense. So I see this entrepreneur convinced investors to pour 1 million each into a brand new town. Now that would be a good one.
So the way that I do a few things with headlines, but the biggest thing that I like to do is I like to make the headline a sentence. And when I think of what that sentence is going to be, I imagine so a lot of my content starts with the headline. And the way that it works is, imagine Ross and Sam are sitting at a bar and they're like, I just listened to this podcast with Warren Buffett, and it was all about being patient. And in fact, he mentioned how he didn't actually No, he mentioned that like he made a bunch of money at the age of 40, but actually the majority, I think like 99% of his net worth, it actually came after the age of 55. So that's like a 60-minute podcast, and you just remembered that one line. And so in my head, I'm like, well, the title needs to be like, here's how Warren Buffett made 99% of his wealth past the age of 60. And then I use the meta description or the subheadline. I use the word meta description because I'm like typing in WordPress, but the subheadline is like on Facebook. When you post an article, you see an image, you see the headline, and then you see the subheadline. And then the subheadline is a play off of the headline, and oftentimes it's going to be continuing the conversation. So I'll be like, the headline will be like, Warren Buffett made 99% of his net worth after the age of 60. So the meta description or subheadline is going to be the secret, ? Patience. In this podcast, he dives deep on exactly how long it takes and what being patient means. So does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. So you're kind of continuing the thought from that sentence. So is how you're doing that in practice, like you're recording a podcast, My First Million, for example, or even if maybe you're not doing as much anymore, but you would immediately think back, like, how would I summarize the thing I would tell people about that podcast in some ways?
Yeah, but it's very cyclical. So like it starts like it's more of an art than a science, but basically I go into something with a headline in mind, and then I start doing the work, and it either is exactly the headline or it deviates a little bit, and I find a new headline, but I'm constantly thinking in terms of just how do I explain this in literally one sentence to someone that I'm just talking about this over dinner with. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, it makes sense. So it's kind of a conversation. That's a good framing.
Yeah. And then typically the way of importance is I believe headlines first, picture second, subheadlines third.
Interesting. Okay. And this is across networks, or you're thinking about YouTube in particular?
I am not a YouTube expert, so I can't claim to know anything about that. I'm referring to articles.
Got it. So this could be like the Hustle email newsletter would apply to that.
Yeah, but I do think that if I had a bet, YouTube follows that same premise, but there's like the nerds on YouTube are so much better at this than I am, and I would not say I'm an expert on YouTube at all.
So you said number 2 is the photo, which I mean, I definitely see the thumbnail portion. Or is there anything about how you think about that? I mean, it's not technically copy, but same kind of concept.
Yeah, but a picture tells a story, or what's it? A picture is worth 1,000 words. So like it is sort of copy, but copy to me, copywriting is just taking what's in my brain and putting it in your brain, or it's manipulating. It's manipulating you to feel or do the thing I want you to do or feel. Now, what that means is I could be Martin Luther King and I'm giving a speech on why civil rights are important, and I'm going to make you buy into this cause. It could be I'm going to convince you to go on a date with me. It could be I'm going to convince you to buy something. It could be I'm going to convince you to join my company. And so it's all about taking what's in my brain, putting it in your brain, and getting you to do some type of action, whether that's feeling a certain way or doing something. And a photo is just one attribute or one medium to make that goal come to fruition.
Makes sense. Yeah, I see one example from your articles on The Hustle that I'll screen share here on YouTube. You have why buying a house is a bad idea, and then the thumbnail is you holding a little anti-house club image, which is pretty funny. And
then scroll down. So scroll down and go to I'll give you a good one. So type in The Hustle Soylent. That one went crazy viral. I could do a breakdown of that one, and then after that, I'll show you another article. But the preview image on this one was that before and after photo. But yeah, and like they're not that different. But before and after photos, even if they're not different, they're very catchy. But the headline on this one performed well. And in fact, I believe when I did it was the Soylent. So right, for the listener, this is an article about how when Soylent, which is basically like Slim Fast for nerds, it's like a drink, that's like a food. It went popular 5 years ago. I don't even remember, 10 years ago. And I had a guy live on it for 30 days. And the headline was what happened when I went 30 days without food. However, that was for social. The search headline said Soylent, how I went 30 days without food. Because when people Googled Soylent, their website came up number 1, and then we came up number 2. And that worked really well. We got so much traffic on that one. And then the sub headline is, I spent the last 30 days eating nothing but Soylent, a new age power meal replacement. Why would I do something so stupid? I'll explain. But first, if you aren't familiar with Soylent, when this got transferred over to HubSpot, they kind of screwed up that part. But that's like the part where the sub headline is continuing the story on the headline.
So in your course, you mentioned the AIDA model. Are you consistently, like, no matter what you're doing, referencing this model? And like, is it present here, or is it in your post structure templates?
Yeah. So the way that it's present here is the photo is attention grabbing, and so is the headline, and then the interest in the interest is the sub headline, and then oftentimes this could have gotten screwed up a little bit when they transferred. So we used WordPress. It looks like this got transferred over to HubSpot. But like, I'll be like, here's how you can implement this as well, or something like that as like a desire and action. But yeah, I think AIDA, I think of attention, interest, desire, action oftentimes. But basically, I'm always thinking, how do I get your attention? And here's another one. So on The Hustle, type in Pandora. This article was the very first article we wrote. I think it was the very first one, but it was close to it. This got something like, can you do Pandora's founder? No, Pandora founder pay. Something where he convinced his employees to work without pay. Is there? Yeah, there it is. So this was one of the very first articles I ever wrote. I think did I write it in the summer? I can't see it. It was the summertime of like 15. And this article got 1 million views, I believe, in the first week of us in business.
Wow. I might have seen it. Yeah, I kind of remember this and probably didn't associate it to you, but now.
And the reason why this worked was Tim Westergen, the founder of Pandora, the music listening service. He gave this 45-minute talk at one of my events. But at the very end, minute 43 or something like this, he had mentioned somewhere in his story that in the first 2 years of Pandora, he didn't have enough money to pay someone. And at the very end, someone was like, hey, you barely mentioned that you couldn't afford to pay your staff. What speech did you give people to make that happen? And he goes, oh my gosh, if I close my eyes, I get sweats, like just thinking about that. But let me see if I can deliver that speech. And he delivered the speech, and it was amazing. And I felt this like emotion of inspiration. And I'm like, that's the article. And that's the article, which is, listen to this inspiring speech that the founder of Pandora gave to get employees to work without pay for 2 years. That whole speech, I was like, oh, that's the headline. Got it. And that's oftentimes how I think.
Makes sense. I think that's a helpful practice for sure, for thinking about headlines and more productivity there. Anything else come up top of mind? I mean, that's a pretty good summary as well.
Yeah.
Nice.
No, I mean, I have a lot of fun with it. I think more people should.
Nice. Yeah, it comes through, and I think that's probably a big part of why you're successful, no doubt. So you mentioned in a lot of your copywriting, I saw it in your course, the importance of building a slope that gets people past the title. And you just talked about it with the sub-headline. You have the kind of snackable preview clip on My First Million that I think lets you know what's to come. Like, do you have any specific process for figuring out what that is, both for My First Million and maybe just generally, like, the idea of that slope? Could you kind of touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, and that you're referring to this like rule of copywriting, which is to create a slippery slope. And what that means is the purpose of the first sentence is to get you to read the second sentence. The purpose of the second sentence is to get you to read the third sentence, and so on and so forth. You want people, your reader, to fall down the slippery slope where after a few minutes, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm reading this like 2,000 word thing, or like this just like went so fast. And there are tactics for doing it. It's like sometimes it's really simple tactics. Like, for example, short sentences under 30 words tend to be quicker. And then the idea being is like once someone's starting something, inertia often takes them through. So I want to like remove friction, and like shorter sentences typically does that. Or whenever you're going to use a comma, use a period instead and start the second word with and or but. So every sentence, the goal of a sentence should just be to convey one single point. And oftentimes people will have a long sentence and they'll use a comma and I tell them, actually just that long sentence, make it 2 sentences. Because that's like a one little trick to get people to continue to read. Yeah.
Nice.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. I signed up for the course over the weekend. I haven't gotten the whole thing. To just kind of you've got a great course on copywriting that I suggest checking out. Copy that. I'm enjoying it so far. One of the points in there, I believe it's the Hemingway grade level.
Yeah.
That relates a little bit, right? Could you touch on
so
that?
basically, like a lot of people, because of the way they're taught in school is very, very complicated. So like when you're in English class, it's like, describe the flower, and you're like, it has like a bright blue teal shade to it, and it's like you start describing this flower, but you're using long words that you're probably not entirely sure what it means, but you think that you get some type of credit for like sounding really smart. But with effective writing, it's kind of the opposite. And so there's this app called Hemingway app that I like. I think it's hemingwayapp.com, and it's free. And you put all your writing in there, and it gives you a grade, and it says like you're using too many adverbs or you're doing this and that wrong, but you're writing at a 12th grade reading level. And a lot of people will be like, oh, that's great, I'm smart. And I say, no, you actually want to be at like a 6th grade reading level. And there's tons and tons of examples of incredibly brilliant people, and they write at a 4th grade reading level. Hemingway himself, one of America's greatest authors of all time, go and copy and paste a bunch of his work and put it into that Hemingway app. I bet you it'll be at a 4th grade reading level. Or Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett writes these amazing annual reports, and he's describing incredibly complex things like the insurance business. That's like a very complex thing. But he uses these simple, easy to understand analogies. That's what he's famous for. And in fact, Warren Buffett's words per sentence has dropped from something like 21 words to like 16 words on average over as he's gotten older. It's literally like been like a linear line down. If you Google like Sam Parr, Warren Buffett word count, I did like a whole study on this. And so you can talk about complicated shit, smart people stuff, whatever, and use simple language like the boy kicked the ball. Like I could tell you a story writing sentences like the boy kicked the ball, he did this, and then this happened. And you could be in tears. You know what I mean? Like I can use simple language and make you feel a certain emotion. I don't need to be complicated. And part of the slippery slope and part of copywriting is to write without jargon, so anyone can understand this complicated thing that you want to get into your head, and do it as simply as possible, which is really hard to do.
Yeah, agreed. When I was a kid, I would open dictionaries and like just try to memorize words, thinking like somehow that was making me smart and a better writer. And like what I've taken away from your course on day 2, and I think I'm a decent writer. I mean, I'm running a content marketing company. I'm hopefully not terrible. Was the idea of writing shorter sentences and trying to be more brief. And at times in the past, I was even thinking to myself, so incorrectly, when I saw some of those very smart people, I'm like, how do they use such simple, this person can't be that smart. Where's their big words? And now as a more educated person seeing content like yours, it's very clear that it's ironically absolutely backwards. The more complicated you are, that you might be smart in some ways, but maybe not.
But that's the hard work. I would say it's actually easy to write in a complicated way. It's hard to write in a simple way. So the service that I am providing to people of making things easy to understand, that's the service that I'm doing. Like I am doing that for them.
Makes sense. So you mentioned that's hard, and I'm sure there's not an absolute answer to this, but like thinking about the ratios, how much time you're spending on the headline, the slope, just copy generally for someone who takes that seriously. Of course, you've been doing this for so long and you probably got it down, but what kind of time do you spend, or guidance would you give people on those kind of ratios, or just generally the time to create something great?
So I used to have a process, but now it's a little bit more loosey goosey because I think that I'm good at the skill. I know the skill. And so like when you know how to play saxophone really well, you could break the rules, and it's still like it becomes your own thing. But I would say that I think of the headline first, and then I think of the emotion that I want someone to feel, and like what action I want them to take, and then I just do what I call a brain dump. I like get my first draft out there, and the first draft is horrible. And what most people do is they write a first draft and they're editing while they're writing. Don't do that. Just like get over the embarrassment and just put all the crap out there, and then take a breather. You go for a walk, you go do something for half an hour, or you come back the next day, and the magic in anything happens in the editing. The editing it takes a lot of time. So David Ogilvy, one of my favorite writers, he goes, I'm kind of a lousy copywriter, but I'm a world-class editor. And so editing is where the magic is, I think. And with ChatGPT, I don't like the output of ChatGPT. But what I can do is I could have ChatGPT come up with a bunch of really good one-liners or do a bunch of interesting stuff, and I'll completely edit it and rewrite it into my own voice. But maybe they'll have like one analogy that's funny or interesting to me. But the secret to a lot of great writing is editing. And so that's where I spend most of my time, is the editing.
Makes sense. Good advice. And so you touched on AI there. Is there any other application? I mean, obviously, some people would say AI is replacing all copywriting. Of course, I'm sure you and I don't believe that. But where are you using it?
Well, I think it maybe one day it will, but it won't today. Like if you ask anyone who's an internet native can go and read content and being like, that was written by AI, and that sounds dumb. Now, I'm not one of these guys. I'm not like a technology will never replace us. Like it could, but it ain't right now. I know that for sure. Or at least when it comes to writing, it could replace some type of writing, but it's people with personalities will still win.
Makes sense.
I like using AI just to like come up with like, usually what I'll do is I used Adobe Acrobat, and I'll scrape like all web pages from like a blog that I like let's say Scott Galloway's No Mercy, No Malice. He's got like, I love his language. He just uses tight language. And I'll be like, I have this idea for this blog post. I wrote a draft. Can you rewrite it like Scott? And what it will give me is mostly horrible stuff. Like I'm not going to use any of it, but like maybe like it like sparks some idea of like, oh, that's so interesting. It changed the structure of this sentence, or it put this part of the story last. Like maybe I'll just like that. Maybe I'll just take one little piece of like, and I don't even copy it word for word. I just like, it's just like a sparring partner for like ideas, if that makes sense. And so I'm still making the decision, but every once in a while it'll like, or I'll be like I love rhythm. So a thing about me with writing is rhythm is really important. And so like, if I'm trying to explain to someone rhythm, usually like, you know how like you have something where it's like, this is going to save you time, money, and blank. You're like, oh, I need a blank. Like, what's that blank gonna be? Like, I need three things there to make the rhythm of this perfect. And so I'll use like ChatGPT to help like, what all does this do for me? Do you know what I mean? Because like I want the rhythm, because I believe in rhythm in the point where I like a short sentence, but then I like a sentence that's just a little bit longer. And then I like to bring it on home by giving it a really long sentence that grabs your attention and gets you to fall down this slippery slope and punches you with this bit of emotion. Do you know what I mean? Like I love like changing rhythm. And so sometimes I'll need extra words to create the rhythm.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I mean, it was top of mind for me, exactly as you said it, of the idea of using it as a sparring partner. It seems like I'm using a sparring partner for everything, but to actually be like, it's going to give me the headline, it's going to create the copy, probably unlikely today.
For sure not today.
As you mentioned, yeah. But who knows where it goes. So I've teed up and mentioned your Copy That course. You've mentioned copy work at the front. What is that? And yeah, maybe we start there for people who haven't heard of it.
Yeah, Copy That is this thing. I just made it as a project because people were asking me how to write, and I was like, well, here's just what I did. So the copy work is this methodology that's no longer really popular in writing, but it's popular in other facets of life. And so copy work is the idea that you copy other people's work, and in doing that, you get your hands dirty and you kind of feel what they are doing. and that shapes you. So the best analogy is when you're learning how to play an instrument, let's say you're learning how to play the piano, you're going to play Jingle Bells, you're going to play Happy Birthday, which are other people's songs, and then you're going to learn how to play some like cover that you like, and then you're going to play a few more complicated covers, and then after a year, 2 years, or some amount, you're going to be like, oh wow, I have learned all these other people's works, and I love like this part from Elton John, I love this part from this rock song, I love this thing from the Beatles. I'm going to combine it together, and I'm going to have my own unique voice based off of all my inspiration. Compare that to me taking you to play piano and saying like, all right, today's day one, just write a song. You'd be like, dude, I don't know the rules, or I don't know, like, I need to be inspired. Like, I need to know, like, how it's done. Writing's the same way. And so with copy work, I find all of the writing that I want to be similar to, or that I appreciate, or writing that's already been successful. And I locked myself in the room for like 6 months, and I just spent hours per day with a huge notebook, and I wrote it word for word, copying other people. And so copy that. I just found 10 pieces of work that I love, and I just annotate and explain why it's wonderful and to pay attention to this part. And then people read it word for word, and they're like, this is going to make me better. And I'm like, trust me, give it 5 days and you're going to see. And so now when I have to go and write something, I'll just spend like 15 minutes where I'll be like, I want to channel this person's energy, or I want it to have like this type of person's vibe. So I'll go and find one of their blog posts, and I'll just write it word for word. And I'm like, all right, I'm in the zone. I'm warmed up. Now I can go and write my own thing.
Nice. Love that. So those sales pages, one of the things that comes top of mind with me, I mean, it's definitely still possible. And with email marketing, like many different places, you can apply it in a very similar fashion. You shared Try Rosedale with me, which I'll put in the show notes, which is a new kind of thing you're launching that ties in a little bit, which is a great sales copy letter. Are there any kind of modern copywriters that come to mind that you love, that you'd recommend? Like,
yeah, I love Jason Fried. So Jason Fried from hey.com and Basecamp, and he's probably got a few other projects. I think it's great. I love those guys. There's a lot of retail brands that I think are really cool. Let me give you an example of a small clothing company that I love. All right. So on your computer, Google SEH space Kelly. So this is a one-man shop where he makes really fancy, like $500 sweaters. And he's based out of England. And click one of his items. And look how he has a long form. Yes, click like a sweater or a coat or something like that. Yeah, click one of them, whatever. So scroll down. He writes these long sales letters describing the product. And here's an example of one that I'm reading. So for the model, he goes, the young man here in this picture is a chest 38 and is wearing the Gainsley sweater without anything underneath it. Not that is anyone's real business. And he's wearing a size S, small. And he's like writes like that because like, you're like, well, how big's the model? I want to know, like, but he like throws in these little like silly things, or you're looking at what looks like a coat that's probably pretty expensive, like $1,000 coat or something like that. And he's explaining the complicated manufacturing process behind the coat. And I saw this guy's website, and I'm like, I've emailed him, and he's like, I'm sold out of everything. I'm like, dude, like anytime you get my size, just tell me. I want to buy like all types of stuff from you, because I get so emotionally invested in this guy's brand when I read all his copy.
Yeah, love that. I mean, one of the things you mentioned in your course is just the idea that, and you mentioned, you referenced the Louis C.K. landing page, which I also love Louis C.K.'s copy of, like, even the email sign up area had some novelty to it. Like he had some flair, like, I'm not going to spam you. I forget exactly what it was. But I feel like this is an example that like our SEO audience would probably never think of something like this.
I call it the forgotten text. So things that are like you usually just use the default text, or things that you don't spend any time on. So for example, after someone subscribes to your newsletter, they get a welcome email. And the welcome email is often just the template that MailChimp uses. But if you Google Sam Parr welcome email, you're going to see dozens of blogs wrote about my welcome email for The Hustle, because I worked really hard on the forgotten text. Another thing is like on the pop-up. So our pop-up for the hustle, I wrote this long form like pop-up where everyone's like, dude, long pop-ups need to be short. And I was like, no, let's just make it super long because that's like attention, that's like that's frame breaking. Or my welcome email. Are you reading my welcome email?
For copy that.
No, for the hustle.
Oh no, I'm not.
If you Google the hustle welcome email, like I think like 5 or a handful of people have written about our welcome email, but you'll see it. But basically, like I wrote this like super long form like welcome email for the hustle, and
a letter from the leader of the circus is what.
That's right.
Gotcha. So this is just another idea of. I like that. It's kind of a good mental framework for looking for those areas of what's forgotten is often an area for novelty.
Yeah, or like the follow us on social media or something like you can write, like you can change all that text to something cute and unique and frame breaking.
Nice. Well, that's great. Yeah, anything on copywriting or writing? I mean, there's a lot of common reference points. Like on write, I don't even know if you like them. Bird by Bird, On Writing by Stephen King. Like any kind of, as you mentioned, unusual books that you might mention. We have a lot of writers in the audience, so love.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen King's On Writing was great. I like Joe Sugarman's book. It's the same book but has 2 different titles because I think someone bought the rights. But it was his name's Joe Sugarman, and originally it was called The Adweek Guide to Copywriting. You see it?
Yep.
Yeah. I like that. That's one of my favorites. Those are probably my 2 favorites, but I like read a lot, and I will read on my Kindle, and just anytime there's a beautiful sentence, I just like make note of it and I save it, and I'm like, that sentence, it cut through me. Why did that do that? Like, why do I feel a certain way because of that? And I just analyzed it. And I also love Scott Galloway. I think Scott Galloway is one of my favorite guys out there right now in terms of language. Like he uses words that like I never ever use, and it always catches me. Like he uses the word accoutrements, like the and I'm like, dude, who uses that word? I can't believe you're using that word. That's so silly. So I like when he uses like just ridiculous phrases. It always grabs my attention. Yeah.
Do you have, you mentioned saving a swipe file. Have you ever thought about making yours public? I don't know if you delete that all the time.
I don't do that. I don't make that public. I also don't make my Goodreads public because like people like I get on kicks. So like I'll read one book about like the civil rights movement, and that reads me to like a book about like the Ku Klux Klan, and then people are gonna be like, dude, like what the, or like one time like every young man, I get into a World War II phase, and you're like, if someone just like thought I was a certain way based off of my books, I wouldn't like it. So I don't I don't share any of that stuff.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. If you could randomize it, maybe.
They're like if you saw my latest books, you'd be like, man, you're reading a lot about Timothy McVeigh and the Oklahoma City bombing. Like, what's going on? What are you trying to tell us? I'm like,
yeah,
just interesting.
You might be concerned, I think.
Yeah, so I don't share that stuff.
Nice. Well, that's a bummer, but we get slices of it, so that's the
dude. I talked to a guy the other day, and his father gave a speech at his wedding, and his father didn't know who this person was, but he basically found a quote from like brainyquote.com on like love or something like that. But the quote was attributed to Robert Mugabe, who's like this like horrible dictator from Zimbabwe. And he's like known as being this like killer, like, it's not a very wonderful guy. And the dad was like at his wedding was like, the great Robert Mugabe once said, love is special. And then my buddy was like, dude, do you know who Robert Mugabe is? And the dad was like, no, it just said he was some like diplomat or leader or something. And I just love the quote. And it's like, no, that you can't say Robert Mugabe. It's a bad guy. And so that's like how I feel with some of my swipe files, where it's like the language is interesting or like the phrases are interesting, but every once in a while, if you saw the author or the context behind it, you'd be like, oh my God. Someone go check on Sam.
Yeah, that's fair. I think about that. Like I was just writing kind of a yearly recap post, and I was just thinking about like, is someone going to judge me based on the kind of things I'm consistently reading? I hope not, but it's unfortunate reality.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I don't share any of that stuff.
Yeah. Smart move. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Sam. It was really helpful. I'm excied to take the back half of the course. And
so you're doing it?
I'm literally doing it. Yeah.
So I've been very fortunate. I've created a few companies in my life that I'm so proud of, but for some reason, this little thing called Copy That, it's not big. It's a very, very, very tiny product. It's a small business. I don't even promote it. But for some reason, that's like the thing I'm proud of most. Like, because it impacts people so wonderfully, I think.
Yes, and true to Ada, let's leave on the A and say, go to Copy That. I'll endorse it. Very clearly worth it. I mean, very reasonably priced.
I think it's $150.
Yeah, $150, $169.
$169.
That's not worth it. I'm just kidding. Definitely.
No, it's like it's total. It's so weird. Sometimes I feel self-conscious hanging out with my friends that are building these huge things, and I'm like, this little thing that I made gives me so much joy. Like, I love reading the reviews. It impacts my soul.
Yeah, it almost, I mean, I can see the inspiration, and I don't know if it's related or subconsciously related of Louis C.K., and he has like that $5 thing. Like, I'm sure this is not some like mind-blowing amount for you. I'm sure you get a good amount of sales from it, but
yeah, no, like this, it doesn't change my life at all. But there's just something where I'm like, I worked really hard and I know it works and I stand behind it, and it's like, it was exciting. It's fun.
Nice. Well, hopefully we drive some signups. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Sam. It was great.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Cheers.